Tip-tap shoes, hear that stomp. Pull up a chair, let your shoulders hop. Tiny tales from the tallest trees. Mini pines, come and sway with these. Hey! Mini pines, true crime time. Kick up your heels as the stories unwind. Relax your mind, let the past chime in. We laugh, we learn, let the good tunes spin. Mini pines, true crime time. Sip a little calm while the decades rhyme. Settle right in as the ages sing. History's a hoot with a little swing.
Good evening and welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I totally appreciate it. Let's just say this one, I really loved doing this one. And I tried to record a little earlier and things went sideways on me. So I had to take a break, which was good. And now I'm back. So thanks for joining. If any of you are new, welcome on in. This is what we call our little palate cleanser, if you will, in between our main show. Because that one, it gets heavy. We talk a lot about, true crime and death and things that just happen in life. And when you come to listen to mine, my little mini pines with Becca, I like to take you on a little trip. I like to bring you to places that maybe you've already traveled to. And I'm just going to open up your eyes to myths and legends and lore that are there. So welcome in and welcome back. I'm really glad you decided to spend some time with me tonight because what I have to tell you is a story. It's generally has kept me up at night. And I don't mean that in a dramatic, over-the-top kind of way. I mean that in a very real, very personal sense. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole researching this legend, and there were a couple of nights I just sat up on my desk reading account after account, and I look up at the clock, and, it was way too late at night, and I still wasn't done. So tonight we are heading back to the Pacific Northwest. Specifically, we're going to the Oregon coast. And if you've ever been to Oregon, or even if you've just seen the pictures, you know that this is one of the most hauntingly beautiful places in the entire country. Well, I'm a little biased. There's something about the way the fog rolls in off the Pacific Ocean, the way the trees look like they're holding secrets, the way the coastline feels ancient and wild and a little bit indifferent to human beings. It's gorgeous, but it's also deeply, deeply eerie. And I think that's important context for the story that we're about to get into. So before I get into the legend itself, I want to paint a picture for you. I want you to really feel where this story lives because location matters a lot with folklore. Legends don't just pop up randomly. They're attached to places for a reason. And the place this legend calls home is one that has absolutely earned it. We're talking about U.S. Route 101 along the Oregon coast, specifically the stretch of highway that runs through and around Cannon Beach, Oregon. Now, Cannon Beach is probably the most famous for Haystack Rock, that enormous, iconic basalt sea stack that rises about 235 feet out of the ocean and shows up in basically every Oregon tourism photo you've ever seen. It has also famously appeared in the movie The Goonies, which was filmed partly in Astoria, which is straight up the road. So it's this beautiful, picturesque little coastal town, very artsy, very charming, great restaurants, little galleries, that kind of vibe. But just outside of town, where Highway 101 gets dark and narrow, where the trees close in over the road and the fog can drop visibility down to almost nothing, that's where things get a little different. That's where the Bandage Man lives. And I want to be specific about the geography because here it does matter. The road through this area is not some remote, unmarked trail. It's an actual, functioning state highway. People drive it every single day. Tourists, locals, delivery trucks, hey, you name it. It's not a place you'd expect to feel afraid. It's just a road. But ask someone from the area about the Bandage Man, especially if they grew up there, and watch their face change. Because this is not some distant, abstract legend to people in the part of Oregon. Mm-mm. This is something that feels personal, feels local, feels like something that could actually happen. And that honestly is one of the things that makes this story so fascinating to me. We're not talking about a legend from centuries ago that's been polished and softened by time. No, the Bandage Man is relatively modern. He belongs to the 20th century. And in some ways, that makes him scarier. Okay, so let's get into it. Who is the Bandage Man? What is the Bandage Man? The core legend goes something like this. There is a figure, a man, who haunts the stretch of Highway 101 near Cannon Beach. He is described as being wrapped head to toe in dirty, rotting bandages. Not clean, fresh bandages, old ones, decaying ones, the kind of bandages that suggest something terrible happened to the person underneath them. And then those bandages were never changed, never replaced, never cleaned. They are described as reeking, and I mean absolutely reeking, of rotting flesh and decay. People who claim to have encountered this figure say the smell alone is enough to make you physically ill. So he's typically described as very large, broad, hulking, imposing. He moves with a kind of unnatural purposefulness. And the way he interacts with people, or rather, the way he supposedly attacks people, is through their vehicles. The classic encounter story goes like this. You're driving along Highway 101 at night. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're with someone. You're going through that dark, wooded stretch near Cannon Beach, and suddenly this figure appears, sometimes by the side of the road, sometimes seemingly out of nowhere. And he throws himself at your vehicle. He jumps on the hood, or he leaps onto the truck bed if you're driving a pickup. And then he starts trying to get in. He claws at the windows, he bangs on the roof, he is aggressive and violent. It's absolutely terrifying. And then just as suddenly as he appeared, he's gone, vanished. And the only thing left behind is that horrific smell, that rotting, decaying smell. And maybe, just maybe, some damage to your vehicle. Now, the fact that he targets pickup trucks specifically is something that comes up again and again and again in the accounts of this legend. There's a very particular version of the story that involves a couple parked in a pickup truck on a pull-off near the highway. You know, classic lover lane setup. And the Bandage Man jumps into the truck bed and starts attacking. They manage to drive away, and when they stop somewhere safe and get out to check on things, they find that their dog, who was in the truck bed, has been torn apart. That detail, not that specific horrific detail, now that's the kind of thing that lodges in your brain and does not leave. So where did this legend come from? Now, here's where things get really interesting from a folklore perspective, because every legend has an origin story, or, more accurately, most legends have several competing origin stories, and the Bandage Man is no exception. The most commonly cited origin story ties the Bandage Man to the logging industry. And again, this is where setting and context really matter. Oregon and the Pacific Northwest in general has a long and deeply significant history with logging. It was, and in many ways still is, the backbone of the regional economy. It's dangerous work. Historically, it was incredibly dangerous. Men were injured all the time. Men were killed all the time. Chainsaws, falling trees, heavy machinery, rough terrain. The logging industry claimed lives and limbs on a regular basis. The story goes somewhere along Highway 101 in the logging area near Cannon Beach. There was a terrible accident. A logger was caught in some kind of catastrophic industrial accident. Most versions say it involved a sawmill or some kind of heavy machinery, and he was horrifically burned or mangled or both. His injuries were so severe that they had to be completely wrapped in bandages. And then somehow he escaped from wherever he was being treated. Or he was never properly treated at all. And now he wanders the highway in agony, driven mad by his injuries, lashing out at anyone he encounters. Now that's just one version. Another version is a little less specific, but hits on the same themes. It's essentially the same story. Terrible industrial accident, severe injuries, bandaged wrap survivor, gone feral, but without the specific logging connection. It's just a man, somewhere, sometime, who suffered something unimaginable and now haunts that road. There's also a version that's a little more supernatural in its framing, one that doesn't try to explain the Bandage Man's origins in particular terms at all. In this version, he's simply a spirit, a restless, angry, violent spirit attached to that stretch of highway for reasons that are not entirely clear. He is what he is. He exists because that land, that road, that stretch of dark Oregon coast demands something like him exists. And I find that version kind of compelling, honestly, because when you spend time with folklore, you start to notice that some legends don't really want to be explained. Some legends resist origin stories, and the Bandage Man feels like one of those. He feels like something that was always going to be there, no matter what the historical record says. So let me walk you through what a typical reported encounter with the Bandage Man looks like, because I've read through a lot of these accounts from online folklore databases, from regional ghost story collections, from people who have posted their experiences on forums and, the like. There's some really consistent elements that show up and up again. First, it's almost always at night. Well, it seems obvious, right? Most monster encounters happen at night. But what's interesting is the specific quality of the darkness that people describe. This isn't just regular nighttime darkness. The Pacific Northwest darkness. Heavy, fog, muffled. The kind of darkness where your headlights feel almost useless because the fog just absorbs the light. People describe a real sense of disorientation before the encounter, like the road and the surroundings feel slightly wrong somehow, like the normal rules just don't apply. Second, it's the smell. This comes up in virtually every account. Before they see anything, before anything happens, people describe catching this overwhelmingly nauseating smell, rotting flesh, decay, something biological and deeply wrong. And a lot of people say this is when the fear really kicks in. Not when they see the figure, but when they smell what's coming. There's something primal about that. Our brains are wired to respond to the smell of rot and death. It's a survival instinct. And the Bandage Man apparently triggers that instinct in a very direct way. Third, the attack is fast and violent. There's no build-up. There's no slow approach. People don't describe seeing the figure walking toward them from a distance. He's just suddenly there. And suddenly he's on the vehicle. And suddenly everything is chaos and terror. And that element of explosive, unexpected violence is really consistent across accounts. Fourth, he disappears just as suddenly. Many people manage to drive away, sometimes barely. And when they get to safety and look back or get out to check their vehicle, he's just gone. No figure retreating into the woods, no sign of where he went, just gone. And that smell slowly fading. And fifth, one I find most interesting is the damage to the vehicle. People report dents, scratches, handprints left in the vehicle's finish, actual physical evidence that something happened. Now, obviously, from a skeptical standpoint, those marks could have any number of explanations. But from a folklore standpoint, the fact that the people report physical evidence is really, really significant. It's what separates the Bandage Man from a lot of other legends. He's not just a vision or an apparition. He's leaving marks. Now I want to step back for a second and talk about where the Bandage Man fits into the broader landscape of American folklore. Because I think understanding that context actually makes this legend a little richer and a little more interesting. The Bandage Man belongs to a category of legends that folklorists sometimes call road lore or highway legends. These are stories specifically attached to roads, highways, stretches of pavement, and they are all incredibly common form of American folklore. Think about how many legends you know that are specifically tied to a road. The Vanishing Hitchhiker, Resurrection Mary in Chicago, the ghost of James Dean's car crash location. There are hundreds of these stories, and they exist all over the country. Why the roads? Well, there are a few theories. One is purely practical. Roads are places where accidents happen, where people die, and those deaths create the emotional raw material for legends. Another's completely symbolic. Roads represent transition, movement, the space between places. They're liminal spaces, to use a technical term. And liminal spaces, thresholds, crossroads, boundaries, have always been places where, in human imagination and mythology, the normal rules, well, they get a little fuzzy, where things can cross over from one state of being to another. The Bandage Man also fits into a tradition of what I would call the damaged monster, a figure whose horror comes not from being inhuman, but from being too human, from being a person who suffered something terrible and was transformed by something into something frightening. So think of the classic universal monster in some ways, the mummy wrapped in bandages, ancient and wrong. Think of horror movie burn victims. There's a specific kind of dread that comes from looking at something that was once a person and seeing the evidence of what was done to them. It forces a kind of empathy alongside the fear. You're afraid, but you also might feel something else. Pity or guilt, or just a very uncomfortable mixture of the two. And I think that's actually what makes this man so enduring as a legend. He's not just scary, he's sad. There's a tragedy underneath all of that horror. This is a man who suffered, whether he was once a person, and that humanity, however buried, however distorted, is still there in the legend. It's still part of what he is. Now I want to share some of the specific accounts that I found the most compelling in my research. And I want to be upfront with you. I cannot verify these. I'm not claiming these are documented events, but what I can tell you is that these are the stories that real people have shared in their own words, and they are part of the living tradition of this legend. One account comes from a man who grew up near Cannon Beach and described a night in his late teens when he and his two friends were driving back from a bonfire on the beach. It was late, maybe 1, 2 in the morning, and they were on Highway 101 going through that wooded stretch. And he says that without any warning, without any buildup, they smelled it. All three of them simultaneously. He described it as the worst thing he had ever smelled in his life, like meat left in the sun for days. And then something hit the roof of the car. Just an enormous crashing impact from above. He floored the accelerator and they drove as fast as they could, and nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time. When they finally stopped and got out to take a look, there was a dent in the roof of the car, a big one. And around the edges of the dent, there were what he described as handprints, the impression of large hands in the metal. He was very clear that he never saw anything. Not a figure, not a face, nothing. Just that smell, that impact, and those marks. Another account I came across was from a woman who described being parked with her boyfriend in a pull-off near the Cannon Beach. This was, late 80s, she said. They were in a pickup truck, and again, pickup truck, big detail here. This is the one where they had the dog in the back of their bed. The one that they had heard growling when all of a sudden there was a weight that shifted as if someone had climbed in. And the dog barking, howling, making sounds like it had never heard before. And then the banging on the windows, the scraping, the scratching, as if something was trying to get in. They took off out of there as fast as they could possibly go. And when they were able to finally make a stop, they got out. They took a look. But in the back, their dog, torn to pieces. And what do I make of that story? I genuinely don't know. What I find compelling about it is the detail of the boyfriend's silence. That's what it was. I didn't want to talk about it. But neither one of them could recall seeing who it was that was back there. But it was that smell, that decay, that rot. They knew what legend that they had encountered. So I want to be fair here. What I want to give the skeptical perspective its proper due. Because if we're going to talk about this stuff honestly, we have to acknowledge that there are very straightforward, very rational explanations for most of what I've been describing. Let's start with that smell. The Oregon coast has a lot going on olfactorily. There's the marine life decomposing on the beach. There are logging operations that produce their own distinct smells. There's organic matter in the forest, decomposing leaves, fungi, animals that have died in the woods. A sudden awful smell while driving through a forested area near the coast is generally, it's not surprising. It can feel shocking and overwhelming, especially at night when your senses are already heightened. But it has entirely mundane explanations. The physical impacts, those things hitting the vehicles, also have pretty self-explanatory explanations. Deer and elk are common on these Oregon roads. Deer striking a vehicle at night is genuinely terrifying. It happens all the time. Large birds, owls for instance, they can strike cars, falling debris from trees, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where trees are enormous and the weather can be dramatic, could absolutely create the sensation of something large impacting a vehicle. And the handprints. All right, guys. Look, handprints in a car finishes are incredibly easy to find if you're looking for them. So every time you've ever touched your car, you've left impressions. They're just not usually visible. But if you're primed to look for them, if you've just had a frightening experience and you're examining your car in a state of mixed to high anxiety, you're going to find them. That's not a character failing and falling out of the sky. That's just how human perception works. We find what we are looking for. Now, here's the thing. I am laying all of that out, and none of it is wrong. Every single one of these explanations is legitimate, and yet that legend persists. And it persists not because people are gullible or stupid. It persists because these explanations, even when they're offered to people who've had these experiences, don't quite satisfy. They don't quite close the case, and I think that's worth paying attention to, because legends aren't really about literal truth. They're about emotional truth. The Bandage Man isn't just a legend about a weird thing that might happen on Highway 101. He's a legend about vulnerability, about the danger of dark roads and dark nights, about the working class injuries and industrial accidents that shape this region, about the uncanny quality of the Oregon coast landscape, about all the things that feel slightly wrong unsettling, threatening, that we can't quite put into words. And that kind of truth doesn't get debunked by pointing out that deers hit cars. So that's the Bandage Man, a hulking, rotting, bandage-wrapped figure on a dark stretch of Oregon highway, a product of logging culture and coastal fog and the human need to put a face on danger and suffering and the uncanny. A legend that has outlasted the specific conditions that created it and found new audiences and new relevance in ways that I don't think anyone originally predicted. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, and I keep coming back to that core image, the bandages, the wrapping. There's something so human about it. The bandages, they represent care, right? They represent someone trying to heal, someone trying to help. They're a medical intervention. It's an act of kindness. And the fact that those bandages have rotted, that they've decayed along with whomever is underneath them, that they've never been changed or replaced, that feels like profound abandonment. Like someone who needed care and didn't get it. Someone who needed help and was left alone. And maybe that's the real heart of this story. Not the monster, not the fear, but the person underneath those bandages who was left to become a monster because nobody came. Because the system failed. Because the work was too dangerous and the support was too thin. And the man who got hurt just had to deal with it as best as he could. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into a ghost story about a big scary guy on a highway. Maybe sometimes a monster is just a monster. But I don't think so. I think the stories the community tells about its dark roads and the dark nights tell us everything about what that community carries with it, what it can't let go of, what it needs to keep alive, even when it be easier to forget. The Bandage Man is Oregon's. He belongs to that coast, to that highway, to the trees and the fog and the working history of the place. And I think as long as people drive that road at night, as long as the fog rolls in and the trees close over and the darkness gets heavy, he'll be there, waiting, wrapped up in everything that region has ever needed to say and couldn't find the words for. Thank you so much for listening tonight. I really hope you appreciate spending time with me. I've appreciated spending some time with you guys. And until next time, please drive safe and maybe keep your windows up on that stretch of Highway 101. Thanks for listening.
Well, that's our show tonight. We laughed and kept it light. From the first hello to the last.